bent over double and made it necessary for him to excuse himself from dinner tables, refuse phone calls, and turn down the occasional invitation to speak. It wasn't so much because he was ill, as that there was something he wished to say. The more time passed, the more he longed to say it, and the more impossible saying it became. Sometimes he woke in a panic from his dreams. "Rosa," he'd shout. But before the words were out of his mouth, he'd feel her hand on his chest. And at the sound of her voice, "What is it? What's wrong, sweetheart?" He'd lose his courage, overcome with fear of the consequences. And so instead of saying what he wanted to say, he said, "It's nothing, just a bad dream," and waited for her to fall back asleep before pushing off the covers and stepping out to the balcony. When he was young, Litvinov had a friend. Not his best friend, but a good one. The last time he saw this friend was the day he left Poland. The friend was standing on a street corner. They'd already parted ways, but both turned back to see the other go. For a long time they stood there. His friend's cap was gathered in a fist held to his chest. He raised his hand, saluted Litvinov, and smiled. Then he pulled his cap down over his eyes, turned, and disappeared empty-handed into the crowd. Not a day went by now that Litvinov did not think about that moment or that friend. On nights when he couldn't sleep, Litvinov would sometimes go to his study and take out his copy of The History of Love. He reread the 14th chapter, The Age of String, so many times that now the binding opened to it automatically. This is a part that I also starred when I was in high school, so chapter 14 apparently I really liked. So many words get lost. They leave the mouth and lose their courage, wandering aimlessly until they are swept into the gutter like dead leaves. On rainy days you can hear their chorus rushing past. "I was a beautiful girl. Please don't go. I too believe my body is made of glass. I've never loved anyone. I think of myself as funny. Forgive me." There was a time when it wasn't uncommon to use a piece of string to guide words that otherwise might falter on the way to their destinations. Shy people carried a little bundle of string in their pockets, but people considered loud mouths had no less need for it, since those used to being overheard by everyone were often at a loss for how to make themselves heard by someone. The physical distance between two people using a string was often small. Sometimes the smaller the distance, the greater the need for the string. The practice of attaching cups to the ends of the string came much later. Some say it is related to the irrepressible urge to press shells to our ears, to hear the still surviving echo of the world's first expression. Others say it was started by a man who held the end of a string that was unraveled across the ocean by a girl who left for America. When the world grew bigger, and there wasn't enough string to keep the things people wanted to say from disappearing into the vastness, the telephone was invented. Sometimes no length of string is long enough to say the thing that needs to be said. In such cases, all the string can do, in whatever its form, is conduct a person's silence. And Litvinov coughed. The printed book in his hands was a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of the original, which no longer existed except in his head. Not the original, as in the ideal book a writer imagines before sitting down to write. The original that existed in Litvinov's head was the memory of the manuscript handwritten in his mother's tongue, the one he'd held in his hands the day he'd said goodbye to his friend for the last time. They hadn't known it was going to be the last, but in their hearts, each had wondered. In those days, Litvinov had been a journalist. He'd worked at a daily, writing obituaries. From time to time, in the evenings after work, he went to a cafe populated by artists and philosophers. Because Litvinov didn't know many people there, he usually just ordered a drink and pretended to read a newspaper he'd already read, listening to the conversations around him. The thought of time outside of our experience is intolerable. Marx, my ass. The novel is dead. Before we declare our consent, we must carefully examine. Liberation is just the means of attaining freedom. It's not synonymous with it. Malevich, my snot is more interesting than that butthole. And that, my friend, is the trouble with thinking. Sometimes Litvinov found himself disagreeing with someone's argument, and in his head he delivered a brilliant rebuttal. One night he heard a voice behind him. Must be a good article. You've been reading it for the last half hour. Litvinov jumped, and when he looked up, the familiar face of his old childhood friend was smiling down at him. They embraced and took in the slight changes time had enacted on the other's appearance. Litvinov had always felt a certain affinity with this friend, and he was anxious to know what he'd been doing the last few years. Working like everyone else, his friend said, pulling up a chair. And you're writing? Litvinov asked. His friend shrugged. It's quiet at night. No one bothers me. The landlord's cat comes and sits on my lap. Usually I fall asleep at my desk and wake when the cat stalks off at the first sign of daylight. And then, for no reason, they both laughed. From then on, they met every evening at the cafe. With groaning horror, they discussed the movements of Hitler's armies and the rumored actions being taken against the Jews until they became too depressed to speak. But perhaps something more cheerful, his friend would finally say, and Litvinov would happily change the subject, eager to test out one of his philosophical theories on his old friend, or to run by him a new fast cash plan involving ladies' stockings and the black market, or to describe the pretty girl who lived across the street from him. His friend, in turn, occasionally showed Litvinov bits of what he was working on. Small things, a paragraph here and there. But Litvinov was always moved. With the first page he read, he recognized that, in the time since they had been schoolboys together, his friend had grown into a real writer. A few months later, when it was learned that Isaac Babel had been killed by Moscow's secret police, it fell to Litvinov to write the obituary. It was an important assignment, and he worked hard on it, trying to strike the right tone for a great writer's tragic death. He didn't leave the office until midnight, but as he walked home through the cold night, he smiled to himself, believing the obituary was one of his finest. So often the material he had to work with was thin and paltry, and he had to patch something together with a few superlatives, cliches, and false notes of glory in order to commemorate the life and bolster his sense of loss over the death. But not this time. This time it had been necessary to rise to the material, to struggle to find words for a man who had been a master of words, who had devoted his entire existence to resisting the cliché in the hope of introducing to the world a new way of thinking and writing, a new way even of feeling, and whose reward for his labors was death by firing squad. The next day it appeared in the newspaper. His editor called him into his office to congratulate him on his work. A few of his colleagues also complimented him. When he saw his friend that evening in the cafe, he too praised the piece. Litvinov ordered them a round of vodka, feeling happy and proud. A few weeks later, his friend didn't show up at the cafe as usual. Litvinov waited an hour and a half and then gave up and went home. The next evening, he waited again, and again his friend didn't come. Worried, Litvinov set out for the house where his friend boarded. He'd never been, but he knew the address. When he got there, he was surprised by how dingy and run down the house was, by the oily walls in the entryway and the smell of something stale. He knocked on the first door he came to. A woman answered. Litvinov asked after his friend. Yeah, sure, she said. The big writer, she jerked her thumb upwards. Top floor on the right. Litvinov knocked for 5 minutes before he finally heard his friend's heavy steps on the other side. When the door opened, his friend stood in his bedclothes looking pale and haggard. What happened? Litvinov asked. His friend shrugged and coughed. Watch out or you'll catch it too, he said, dragging himself back to bed. Litvinov stood awkwardly in his friend's cramped room, wanting to help, but not knowing how. At last a voice came from the pillows. A cup of tea would be nice. Litvinov hurried to the corner where a makeshift kitchen was set up and banged around looking for the kettle. On the stove, his friend called weakly. While the water boiled, he opened the window to let in a little fresh air and washed the dirty dishes. When he brought the steaming cup of tea to his friend, he saw that he was shivering with hangover, so he closed the window and went downstairs to ask the landlady for an extra blanket. Eventually, his friend fell asleep. Not knowing what else to do, Litvinov sat down in the only chair in the room and waited. After a quarter of an hour, a cat meowed at the door. Litvinov let it in, but when she saw that her midnight companion was indisposed, she stalked out. In front of the chair was a wooden desk. Pages were scattered across the surface. One caught Litvinov's eye and, glancing over to make sure his friend was soundly asleep, he picked it up. Across the top it said, "The Death of Isaac Babel." Only after they charged him with the crime of silence did Babel discover how many kinds of silences existed. When he heard music, he no longer listened to the notes, but the silences in between. When he read a book, he gave himself over entirely to the commas and semicolons, to the space after the period and before the capital letter of the next sentence. He discovered the places in a room where silence gathered, the folds of curtain drapes, the deep pulls of the family silver. When people spoke to him, he heard less and less of what they were saying, and more of what they were not. He learned to decipher the meaning of certain silences, which is like solving a tough case without any clues, with only intuition. And no one could accuse him of not being prolific in his chosen métier. I don't know that word. Daily, he turned out whole epics of silence. In the beginning, it had been difficult. Imagine the burden of keeping silent when your child asks you whether God exists, or the woman you love asks you if you love her back. At first, Babel longed for the use of just two words, yes and no. But he knew that just to utter a single word would be to destroy the delicate fluency of silence. Even after they arrested him and burnt all of his manuscripts, which were all blank pages, he refused to speak. Not even a groan when they gave him a blow to the head, a boot tip in the groin. Only at the last possible moment, as he faced the firing squad, did the writer Babel suddenly sense the possibility of his error. As the rifles were pointed at his chest, he wondered if what he had taken for the richness of silence was really the poverty of never being heard. He had thought the possibilities of human silence were endless, but as the bullets tore from the rifles, his body was riddled with the truth. And a small part of him laughed bitterly because, anyway, how could he have forgotten what he had always known? There's no match for the silence of God. Litvinov dropped the page. He was furious. How could his friend, who could have his pick of what to write about, steal the one subject about which he, Litvinov, happened to have written something of which he was proud? He felt mocked and humiliated. He wanted to drag his friend out of bed and demand what he'd meant by it. But after a moment he cooled down and read it again. And as he did, he recognized the truth. His friend hadn't stolen anything that belonged to him. How could he have? A person's death belongs to no one but the one who's died. A feeling of sadness came over him. All these years, Litvinov had imagined he was so much like his friend. He prided himself on what he considered their similarities. But the truth was that he was no more like the man fighting a fever in the bed 10 feet away than he was like the cat that had just slunk off. They were different species. It was obvious, Litvinov thought. All you had to do was look at how each had approached the same subject. Where he saw a page of words, his friend saw the field of hesitations, black holes, and possibilities between the words. Where his friend saw dappled light, the felicity of flight, the sadness of gravity, he saw the solid form of a common sparrow. Litvinov's life was defined by a delight in the weight of the real, his friend's by a rejection of reality, with its army of flat-footed facts. Looking at his reflection in the dark window, Litvinov believed something had been peeled away and a truth revealed to him. He was an average man. A man willing to accept things as they were, and, because of this, he lacked the potential to be in any way original. And though he was wrong in every way about this, after that night, nothing could dissuade him. Beneath the death of Isaac Babel was another page, with tears of self-pity stinging his sinuses. Litvinov read on. Franz Kafka is dead. He died in a tree from which he wouldn't come down. Come down, they cried to him. Come down, come down. Silence. Silence filled the night, and the night filled the silence while they waited for Kafka to speak. "I can't," he finally said, with a note of wistfulness. "Why?" they cried. Stars spilled across the black sky. "Because then you'll stop asking for me." The people whispered and nodded among themselves. They put their arms around each other and laughed and touched their children's hair. They took off their hats and raised them to the small, sickly man with the ears of a strange animal sitting in his black velvet suit in the dark tree. Then they turned and started for home under the canopy of leaves. Children were carried on their father's shoulders, sleepy from having been taken to see the man who wrote his books on pieces of bark. He tore off the tree from which he refused to come down, in his delicate, beautiful, illegible handwriting, and they admired those books, and they admired his will and stamina. After all, who doesn't wish to make a spectacle of his loneliness? One by one, families broke off with a good night and a squeeze of the hands, suddenly grateful for the company of neighbors. Doors closed to warm houses. Candles were lit in windows. Far off, in his perch in the trees, Kafka listened to it all. The rustle of clothes being dropped to the floor, of lips fluttering along naked shoulders, beds creaking under the weight of tenderness. It all caught in the delicate, pointed shells of his ears and rolled like pinballs through the great hall of his mind. That night, a freezing wind blew in. When the children woke up, they went to the windows and found the world encased in ice. One child, the smallest, shrieked out in delight, and her cry tore through the silence and exploded the ice of a giant oak tree. The world shone. They found him frozen on the ground like a bird. It said that when they put their ears to the shell of his ears, they could hear themselves. Beneath that page was another page, titled The Death of Tolstoy, and beneath that was one for Osip Mandelstam, who died at the bitter end of 1938 in a transit camp near Vladivostok. And beneath that, 6 or 8 more. Only the last page was different. It said, The Death of Leopold Gursky. Litvinov felt a gust of cold in his heart. He glanced at his friend, who was breathing heavily. He started to read. When he got to the end, he shook his head and read it again, and again after that. He read it over and over, mouthing the words as if they were not an announcement of death, but a prayer for life. As if just by saying them, he could keep his friend safe from the angel of death, and force of his breath alone keeping its wings pinned for a moment more. A moment more. A moment more. Until it gave up and left his friend alone. All night, Litvinov watched over his friend, and all night he moved his lips, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he did not feel useless. As morning broke, Litvinov saw with relief that the color had returned to his friend's face. He was sleeping the restful sleep of recovery. When the sun had climbed to the position of 8 o'clock, he stood. His legs were stiff. His insides felt scraped out. But he was filled with happiness. He folded The Death of Leopold Gursky in half. And here is another thing no one knows about Zvi Litvinov. For the rest of his life, he carried in his breast pocket the page he'd protected all night from becoming real, so that he could buy a little more time for his friend, for life. We're starting a new chapter now. This is called Until the Writing Hand Hurts. The pages I'd written so long ago slipped away, slipped from my hands and scattered to the floor. I thought, who and how? I thought, after all these, what years? I fell back into my memories. The night passed in a fog. By morning I was still shocked. It was noon before I was able to go on. I knelt down in the flower. I gathered the pages up one by one. Page 10 gave me a paper cut. Page 22 a pang in the kidneys. Page 4 a blockage in the heart. A bitter joke came to my mind. Words failed me. And yet, I clutched the pages, afraid my mind was playing tricks on me, that I would look down and find them blank. I made my way to the kitchen. The cake sagged on the table. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered today to celebrate the mysteries of life. What? No. Stone throwing is not allowed. Only flowers or money. I wiped the eggshells and spilled sugar off my chair and sat down at the table. Outside, my loyal pigeon cooed and fluttered its wings against the glass. Perhaps I should have given him a name. Why not? I've taken pains to name plenty of things less real than he. I tried to think of a name that would give me pleasure to call. I glanced around. My eye came to rest on the menu from the Chinese takeout. They haven't changed it for years. Mr. Tong's famous Cantonese, Szechuan, and human cuisine. I tapped the window. The pigeon flapped off. Goodbye, Mr. Tong. It took me most of the afternoon to read. Memories crowded in. My eyes blurred. I had trouble focusing. I thought, I'm seeing things. I pushed back my chair and stood. I thought, Mazel tov, Kirksky, you finally lost it completely. I watered the plant. To lose, you have to have had. Ah, so now you are a stickler for details. Have, didn't have. Listen to you. You made a profession out of losing. A champion loser you were. And yet, where's the proof you've ever had her? Where's the proof that she was yours to have? I filled the sink with soapy water and washed the dirty pots. And with each pot and pan and spoon I put away, I also put away a thought I couldn't bear, until my kitchen and my mind returned to a state of mutual organization. And yet, Shlomo Wasserman had become Ignacio da Silva. The character I called Doodle Slock was now Rodriguez. Feingold was Depaidma. So-called Slonim became Buenos Aires, a town I'd never heard of and now stood in for Minsk. It was almost funny, but I didn't laugh. I studied the handwriting on the envelope. There was no note. Believe me, I checked 5 or 6 times. No return address. I would have interrogated Bruno if I'd thought he'd have anything to tell. If there's a package, the super leaves it on the table in the lobby. No doubt Bruno saw it and picked it up. It's a big event when something comes for either of us that can't fit in the mailbox. If I'm not mistaken, the last time was 2 years ago. Bruno had ordered a studded dog collar. Perhaps it doesn't go without saying that he'd recently brought home a dog. It was small and warm and something to love. He called it BB. Come, BB, come. I'd hear him call, but BB never came. Then one day he took it to the dog run. Vamos, Chico, someone called to their dog, and BB took off toward the Puerto Rican. Come, BB, come! Bruno cried, but to no avail. He switched tactics. Vamos, BB, he shrieked at the top of his lungs. And lo and behold, BB came running. She barked all night and shat over the floor, but he loved her. One day Bruno took her to the dog run. She frolicked and shat and sniffled while Bruno looked on with pride. The gate opened for an Irish setter. BB glanced up. Before Bruno knew what was happening, she shot through the open gate and disappeared down the street. He tried to chase her. Run, he said to himself. The memory of speed flooded his system, but his body revolted. With his first steps, his leg tangled and wilted. Vamos, BB, he cried. And yet, no one came. In his hour of need, crumpled on the sidewalk while BB betrayed him by being what she was, an animal. I was at home pecking away at my typewriter. He came home, devastated. That evening we went back to the dog run to wait for her. She'll come back, I said. But she never came back. That was 2 years ago, and still he goes to wait. I tried to make sense of things. Now that I think about it, I have always tried. It could be my epitaph, Leo Kirksky. You tried to make sense. Night fell, and still I was lost. I hadn't eaten all day. I called Mr. Tong the Chinese takeout, not the bird. 20 minutes later, I was alone with my spring rolls. I turned on the radio. They were asking for pledges. In return, you got a plunger that said WNYC. There are things I find hard to describe, and yet I persist like a stubborn mule in my efforts. Once Bruno came downstairs and saw me sitting at the kitchen table in front of my typewriter. That thing again. The earphones had slipped down to rest like a half halo on the back of his head. I kneaded my knuckles over the steam from my teacup. A regular Vladimir Horowitz, he remarked as he passed on his way to the refrigerator. He hunched over, digging around for whatever it was he wanted in there. I rolled a new page into my machine. He turned around. The refrigerator door is still open, a milk mustache on his upper lip. "Play on, maestro," he said, then pulled the earphones onto his ears and shuffled out the door, turning on the light above the table as he passed. I watched the light chain swing as I listened to the voice of Molly Blue blasting his ears. "There's nothing like a kiss long and hot down to your soul almost paralyzes you." It's only her Bruno listens to now, wearing down the magnetic strip. Over and over, I read the pages of the book I'd written as a young man. It was so long ago. I was naive. A 20-year-old in love. A swollen heart and a head to match. I thought I could do anything. Strange as that might seem, now that I've done all I'm going to do. I thought, how did it survive? As far as I knew, the only copy was lost in a flood. I mean, if you don't count the excerpts I sent in letters to the girl I loved after she left for America. I couldn't resist sending her my best pages, but it was only a few parts, and here in my hands was almost the whole book. Somehow in English, with Spanish names. It boggled the mind. I sat Shiva for Isaac, and while I sat, I tried to understand. Alone in my apartment, the pages on my lap. Night became day, became night, became day. I fell in and out of sleep, but I didn't get any closer to solving the mystery. Story of my life. I was a locksmith. I could unlock every door in the city, and yet I couldn't unlock anything I wanted to unlock. I decided to make a list of all the people I knew or were alive in case I was forgetting someone. I busied myself looking for paper and pen. Then I sat down, smoothed down the page, and brought the nib to meet it. But my mind drew a blank. Instead I wrote, "Questions for the sender." This I underlined twice. I continued. 1. Who are you? 2. Where did you find this? 3. How did it survive? 4. Why is it in English? 5. Who else has read it? 6. Did they like it? And then he's crossed that out. And then rewritten. 6. Is the number of readers greater or less than? I paused and deliberated. Was there a number that wouldn't disappoint me? Okay, I'm gonna stop there. It's starting to come together, you guys. But it's hard to piece together. I think I'll have to rewatch the whole series or reread the whole book in a succession to really piece it together, because I've been reading this for like a span of months in very short chapters at a time, so it will come together though. I think they kind of make it confusing until the very end, and then you realize what it all means, who's really who, what's really going on and what's happening, and what's going to happen. I can't remember, but I just know that it's amazing. It's so worth the wait. Okay, if you did enjoy this, please give it a like. It helps me know that you made it this far in the video, and it helps me know that you like this video. Subscribe to my channel if you already aren't subscribed, and make sure to hit that notification bell if you want to be notified when I come out with new content. I just came out with a video about going to the dentist and what that was like with anxiety, and I'm going to be coming out with even more videos about going to the dentist, which is terrifying, but after that it should all be okay. So if you'd like to see those, go check out my channel page and go to the videos tab, and you'll see all my videos in order. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. I hope you're doing good. I hope you're doing your best, living your best life, trying to improve, understanding you have faults, and still working on yourself and loving yourself through them, and knowing that you and everybody deserves to be loved despite their faults. That's what unconditional love is. And I believe fully that if you have unconditional love in your heart, then you will receive it. So, yeah, hopefully you are receiving it, or you will soon. Whatever you're doing, have a good day, good night, good evening. Bye, guys. Also, give a like if you like country living, because boy do I love me some country living. Alright. reread the whole book. Sorry if you hear my dog snoring. Big Rider, she jerked her thumb upwards. Top floor on the right. This is giving me super Tyler Durden vibes. Holy crap. Living off knocked. Oh my gosh, my boobage is so bad. I'm sorry, y'all. Until the writing hand hurts. I identify with that. Okay, I don't fully understand yet, but to help you understand what I'm starting to understand. Somebody had rewritten his book, and this is what we've been reading about Buenos Aires. And apparently, Buenos Aires has always been Slanim. So everything we've read about Slanim and Buenos Aires is the same. Leo Gerksky, you tried to make sense. That is so weird because I literally had someone tell me once that I try to find the meaning in everything. Or that I do find the meaning in everything. I can't remember which one. But that always is